Ethan spent like 2 hours. He's like, okay, let's just for the sake of fairness, I'm gonna pull up, 5 articles and tell you Netanyahu, he's a genocidal freak.
Yeah.
The idea for the atrocities that they've committed. He made like
so many concessions. Yeah. Yep.
And then he was basically just begging for like a tiny modicum of empathy when it came to the Israelis that were slaughtered in that horrific massacre. And for somebody to tell him that he was essentially being silly.
Yeah. Just reading for days and days about Israel-Palestine,
Yeah.
Fun stuff.
Did you see that video of the guy? I think you featured him before, but it was a parody about celebrities deciding whether or not they were going to go with Israel or
Ryan Long. Yeah.
Dude, that's one of the funniest videos I've seen in a long time. I was trying to remember, when was the last time we spoke?
I don't know. It might have been over a year at this point, do you think? Or actually, can't we just scroll up in Discord and look?
It would have been, we obviously haven't spoken since you got the Twitch ban.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would have been shortly before that. When did that happen?
Let's see. I'm just trying to scroll up in our Discord. It should show us like having a call, right? Damn. I see one in July 14th of 2021. Is that the last time we've talked?
It might have been.
Jesus.
Yeah, 2 years seems about right.
Okay.
Are you gonna do the are you gonna appeal the Twitch ban? Because there was an announcement at TwitchCon about possibly doing some kind of mass clemency.
It didn't sound like mass clemency. It just sounded like they were gonna take appeals a little bit differently. But yeah, I'll do another appeal. I think it's probably coming up in a month or two where I can do my next one again. But
oh, you've already been appealing?
Yeah, I usually appeal whenever it pops up. I think I've done like 3 so far, but they've all gotten like insta rejected with the standard text. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for your help, by the way, retweeting the thing when I had the demonetized YouTube stuff. That was
oh yeah, good job for getting it reversed. Yeah.
That was stressful. Yeah, it took a couple months, but so anyways, I'm curious because you've been digging into the conflict, and I think I've heard you mention that the more you dig into it, the more sympathetic you become to Israel's point of view.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you would expand on that a little bit.
My only knowledge is basically from like 1935 and then sparse knowledge prior to that, and then up to 1970 so far, or 73, and then sparse knowledge after that. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. It's possible that in the last 50 years, maybe if after I catch up from 73 to today, maybe my opinion will completely change. Okay, it's possible.
Yeah.
But I guess there's two stories to Israel-Palestine. The first story is that after breaking promises to Arab people who said they would backstab the Ottoman Empire in exchange for British guarantees of land, the Brits backstabbed the people there, the Palestinians. Basically acquiesced to domestic and international Jewish pressure to promise Jewish people that they would make a land for them in Palestine, and then started shipping in a ton of Jewish people, overriding the will of the local Palestinian population. As a result of that, the Jewish presence grew and grew and grew until there were so many people there, and they had so much funding from the rest of the world, that Israel declared independence. They did a mass expulsion of Palestinian people from their homelands, over 711,000 of them. And then after that, they had set up what was essentially I guess like a settler, colonial, Western imperialist, whatever the fuck state. And that state
real quick, did the Nakba precede the War for Independence, or did that happen after the War for Independence?
So different people have ways of referring to that 1948 war. The 1948, it's the first Israeli-Arab war. Israel refers to it as their War of Independence, but the Palestinians refer to it as the Al-Nakba, because after that War of Independence, that's when the great expulsion of Palestinian from those lands happened. A few left before the war because they thought that shit was kind of weird, and then a lot of them left during and after the war, when they were either expelled forcefully or they ran because they thought they were going to expel forcefully. But essentially, it's my understanding that the Al-Nakba and the first Israeli Palestinian War and the War of Independence, all three of those things roughly refer to the same thing. Where Al-Nakba, I think, means like the disaster in Arabic or something. Yeah.
The cataclysm, the catastrophe.
Or something like that, yeah.
When we're talking about the invasion, was that Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon, or were there other countries involved? Like, was Syria involved in that initial aggression? I
think almost everybody was in some way, size, shape, or form, whether it's by sending troops to help, whether it's by sending equipment to help. But yes, basically the British left because they were tired of everybody there. The Arabs had been revolting from 36 to 39, and then the Jews were revolting from, I think, 44 to 48, like killing British people. And Britain was basically, fuck this, and they left.
They gave it to the UN.
What?
Or like, you guys deal with it.
They tried to give it to the UN. The UN had they passed a huge partition plan, but the Arab people didn't like the partition plan, primarily because it recognized Israel as a state, which they don't like. But then secondly, because they felt like it was unfair that since the Jewish population was smaller than theirs, why are they being given 55% of the land of the Mandate Palestinian area? Now there's
land that was promised to them, like you said before.
Arguably, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah. But then, but then once
you
Israel...
agree Nakba bad, right?
I agree that it's unfortunate. Bad, it's bad for the Palestinians, yeah. Whether it's bad, so this is going to be what everybody's probably going to be fighting about at every stage of Israeli-Palestinian history. The argument is going to be that Jewish people are going to argue, well, in Israel, we were willing to live with and work with the Palestinian Arabs. We were willing to do that. In the Declaration of Israeli Independence, they said they were willing to do it. But after they declared independence, every single Arab country was like, fuck you, we're going to come and invade you and kill you. Now, keep in mind when I say that, the Jewish people still had more military might than all of them combined. I think it was roughly equal to slightly favoring the Jewish people. It's not like it was 1 versus 20 of like huge armies, right? But the issue is that after they invaded, I think after that, the Israeli people were like, okay, well, if you're all going to invade us and everything, then we're going to kick all of you out because we're not going to sit here and get killed by all of you guys. So Jewish people will argue we had to kick them out because they were all trying to attack and kill us. And Palestinians will argue, well, people fought wars for lands that we were promised we lost, but that doesn't mean you can just expel all of us from our lands. It's an ethnic cleansing. Yeah.
Yeah. And the historical context matters too, because they were fleeing Europe after a fucking Holocaust. So they were already primed for, paranoia isn't the word to use because it was justified. They were already primed to be hyper vigilant.
A little bit, yeah.
Of any kind of aggression like that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Not only are they hyper vigilant because of that, but every single succeeding war where Israel wins, so whether it's the first war in 48, whether it's the second war over the Suez Crisis in 56, or whether it's the Six-Day War, the third war in 67. Yeah, every single time they win a war, Arabs basically begin to like massacre or do pogroms against every single Jew in every single Arab country. So every time a war happens and Israel wins, all the other Jews continue to flee the other countries and go to Israel.
Yeah, the Jewish presence in a lot of these neighboring Arab states is just tiny.
Well, they become tiny because all of them start to flee, because every time Israel wins a war against the Arab states, all of the Jews and all the other Arab states kind of start to get a little bit killed and their shit stolen and everything. Yeah.
It gets really dicey because when you try to look at it through a strictly moral lens, it's difficult for me to come to like concrete analysis when it comes to this conflict, because when I put myself in the shoes of Israeli Jews at that time and throughout the decades, and when I put myself in the shoes of Palestinians, like I can understand in both cases being furious and feeling like you have to take these extreme measures. And so I've begun to sort of look at the conflict like this inevitable clash that's basically a quagmire at this point. It's just, I don't know if you saw Pacman's analysis. I thought his analysis was really good in terms of a prescriptive, like a proposal. And, the way that he described it was that the way to a lasting peace proposal, you're never going to get there if Likud and Netanyahu are in power, and you're never going to get there if Hamas is in power in Gaza. And neither one of them, well, in the case of Israel, they have elections, but Hamas obviously isn't going to allow elections, but neither side wants peace.
Well, that's not quite true. I think, my history isn't current, okay, not current, but here's the conflict, okay? Both sides want peace, but what peace is means different things to different people. So for instance, Israel wants peace, okay, in that they want their country to have their borders and they want to stop being attempted genocided by every fucking Arab nation in the area, okay? However, imagine I break into your home and I occupy your living room and we fight over it for like 6 hours and I'm like, can we have a ceasefire and call peace? Can I just fucking live in your living room? To you, you're not going to feel like that's peace. You're literally occupying my fucking living room. This is ridiculous. So when people talk about like from river to sea, right, from the west of the Jordan to the Mediterranean, what they're talking about is peace means the expulsion of every Israeli settler
or extermination.
Well, yeah, if you want to say that, yes. But probably quite a few people actually believe that, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the issue. So I only say that because it's easy to say, you guys are like, well, Israel's okay for peace, and it's like, well, yeah, but the Palestinians feel like, of course, Israel wants peace, but that's because they're on land that shouldn't belong to them, and we're trying to expel them, right? Yeah.
Well, isn't the assumption that Netanyahu has allowed so many settlements encroaching in the West Bank because he has no long-term goal for peace? Like, that's the assumption that a lot of people make.
Yeah.
Is that because these settlements are being allowed to flourish and because they're encroaching on more and more Palestinian territory, that it betrays a long-term strategy of permanent occupation, just slowly dwindling Palestinians' land region size, just little by little over the course of the last few decades, because they have no interest in peace.
Sure.
That to me is really compelling, but I have to do a little bit more homework.
Yeah. So here's
I would want to get Lonerbox's take on that.
Sure. And him and I will probably have a big discussion on this, probably in 2 or 3 days. So if I'm being historical, I say historical, but Netanyahu lived through, I guess, a lot of this. My guess right now, and I don't have the last years of context or Netanyahu's statements. He might have said explicitly what his goal is, but my guess is going to be that the problem with Israel is what they probably want to do is they probably want to annex the West Bank, because they feel like if the West Bank belongs to other people, they lose control of the security apparatus over there. And historically, the West Bank has been a staging ground for attacks against Israel over and over and over and over again by terrorist Palestinian organizations. So if I had to guess, they probably want to just eventually annex the West Bank, but they can't do that until they have like a population majority there, and they've kind of pushed out enough Palestinians that they don't represent like an electoral threat. That's my guess. I don't know 100% if that's, maybe there's going to be something I read about in the next 50 years that changes that, but that'd be my guess for what Israel wants to do.
Why would there be an electoral threat? Like, I don't think they people talk about a one-state solution, but I just feel like that's so out of the realm of possibility that I don't even like entertaining the conversation.
Well, the electoral threat right now, Israel can get away with, everybody says like apartheid state. Israel can get away with treating Palestinians as less than citizens in the occupied territories, because those territories aren't actually part of Israel. These are armistice lines, right, from prior military conflict. They don't actually govern those territories. It's a military administration, so they can get away with treating them differently, with treating everything differently there. However, if Israel formally annexes the territory, they have to grant equal rights to everybody, including voting rights to everybody in that territory. But if there's a fuck ton of Palestinians living in the West Bank, they grant a ton of rights to them. Arabs start to populate the Israeli government. They might be worried that there might be voting populations of people that could cause Israel's existence to come under threat, essentially. Does that make right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with any plans, proposed plans to actually annex the entire West Bank. I don't know where you got that from. Because
historically speaking, the way that you own land is basically by having people there. That's why it's always a big deal about like I always go back to like the settlers in Kashmir for India or whatever, right? If you move more and more people there, eventually you'll have so many people there that if somebody tries to kick you out, they'll be like, bro, we've got like 1 million citizens. You can't kick us out. Like, this is basically our land. And then once you've got so many people there, eventually people have to acknowledge the amount of people there and make some sort of formal declaration of borders. And because imagine if nobody lived in the West Bank and the world was trying to bring Israel to kneel and say like, listen, we need to figure out your borders. Israel probably has to give up the whole West Bank. But let's say it comes to the point to where like 3 million Jews live in the West Bank. Are you really going to say you're going to expel 3 million? That's 5 times as many as Al-Nakba, right? You're really going to expel 3 million Jews from the West Bank? No. So it gives them a stronger claim to the land, which is also why it's legitimate to argue that that is actually a form of like imperialism, is trying to move more and more and more of your citizens there to grow your populations, because it's to give them a stronger claim on the territory, I think.
Yeah, so I'm just curious how that bucks up against your initial reading of history, that you feel like you're slightly more inclined to take the Israeli position. How do you reconcile that with the settlements?
Sure.
It's just, like those are really difficult to defend in my mind. Impossible, really.
Well, it's not impossible. Here's
you can defend it from like a logistical point of view if you just like clearly lay out the goals and take morality out of it. But yeah,
sure. Here's the steelman Israeli argument. Okay, so this is going to be unhinged compared to everything you hear in the news. Okay, this is the steelman Israeli argument, the really strong one. Okay, the steelman Israeli argument is Palestinians a lot of their goals they try to achieve is through terrorism. They've made multiple terrorist organizations in the past. We just got done reading about the Munich massacre, where they're literally going to other countries to commit acts of terrorism. They hijacked like 5 or 10 planes, I think, in the 70s. They're capturing all these people. They're blowing planes up in front of television cameras, hijacking planes like all over the place. It's just like some wild shit. That was why
the blockade began. That's why they put up the wall, and that's why the blockade began in Gaza, is because there were so many suicide bombings going on at the time.
But this is even back in the 70s, right? Also, Palestinian groups that have existed in other countries also try to overthrow those countries. So the PLO in Jordan, for instance, didn't like that that King Hussein, the Jordanian king, wasn't taking their side strong enough in Israel, so they tried to coup the king. They tried to kill him twice, like multiple assassination attempts. One, I think, in another country even. And they also did the same thing in Lebanon, which resulted in a massive civil war up there. So there's this feeling that like Palestinian people are a little bit crazy. And also all throughout Israeli history, Palestinians, in conjunction with other groups of people, have constantly been committing terror attacks on Israeli borders. So Israel probably feels like, listen, fuck you. We're just going to expand our territory to keep ourselves as safe as possible. We're not going to let you guys live right up on the fucking edge of Jerusalem, where you guys control the land, where you guys can be like shelling our fucking cities, from literally hills overlooking us. That's why they still have the Golan Heights, for instance, from Syria, because they don't want artillery up there just shelling Tel Aviv if it can reach. But yeah,
didn't they recently give that up, their claim to the Golan Heights, or did they expand again recently?
I haven't heard that. I would be surprised if they had. It's possible, and I just haven't heard that, but I don't think so. I think the Golan Heights is like one of the things that they're holding on to because
I've found the discourse to be quite remarkable, and I was remembering early on in our discussions, I feel like I was doing it jokingly, but I was a little sincere in my efforts to build bridges between full-on leftists and the spectrum from SOCDEM to just like kind of milquetoast liberal or whatever. Like I was making jokes about brokering a peace treaty between like you and Mike and the serfs, and now my position is just, especially after Ukraine and now especially after this conflict as well, is I
hope they themselves. Yes, I agree 100%. Absolutely. Yeah, those are some of the worst people, the most disgusting fucking people I've ever seen in my entire lives. Like my bitterness towards people like Hasan and Mike and the Source has turned to hardcore hatred. These are like the most disgusting types of people in the world. Jesus.
I really found the discussion between Hasan and Ethan. Well, I've been kind of paying attention to that because I was kind of fascinated, because to me it kind of represented kind of like a larger cultural question or a larger cultural kind of issue in terms of social media political discourse. It felt like it was indicative of something like a schism that had been sort of like building for a really long time, but especially the conversation between Hasan and Ethan, when Ethan spent like 2 hours. He's like, okay, let's just, for the sake of fairness, I'm going to pull up, 5 articles and tell you Netanyahu, he's a genocidal freak.
Yeah.
The IDF for the atrocities that they've committed. He made like so many concessions.
Yeah. Yep.
And then he was basically begging for like a tiny modicum of empathy when it came to the Israelis that were slaughtered in that horrific massacre. And for somebody to tell him that he was essentially being silly.
Yeah.
For focusing
and he's like he's like on his phone, like playing with his dog, like laughing during this part of the discussion. That's what we got. I think we got the legendary quote in that conversation: "Settler babies."
Settler babies, dude.
Like,
yeah. I know. And the ensuing kind of bedlam that took place in the subreddits, the official one and the unofficial one after that.
Mm-hmm. Dude, it's still happening. Yeah.
Especially in the unofficial one. I kind of keep tabs on that a little bit.
That's unhinged. Yeah, go on.
But Ethan's, I feel like I haven't loved all of his takes throughout his time on YouTube, but I found myself sympathizing with him so fucking much, like during that whole ordeal. because it felt like the position from a lot of people on the left was that if you grant any acknowledgement whatsoever to the horrific atrocity that occurred on October 7th, that somehow that meant that you were taking away from any kind of advocacy for Palestinians.
Yeah.
And I just don't see the two as mutually exclusive whatsoever. You can very easily take the position that Hamas are religious fundamentalist psychopaths with a murderous agenda. And you can also take the position that IDF has been overly punitive and particularly brutal in their treatment of Palestinians in Gaza. There's nothing stopping you from taking both of those positions, and acknowledging one of those positions doesn't take away from the other position. And the fact that Ethan was like literally I felt like he was literally begging for some kind of acknowledgement when it came to that.
He was, yeah.
And he was.
It wasn't not even as like a
with,
political person, but like as a friend, he was. Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I found
Jimmy,
that
thanks for the share 5 supper.
Not depressing, but I was like, man, this is dark.
Disgusting.
Like,
it was
I found
truly
it so dark
because he was doing it in front of like his whole community that was just shitting down Ethan and Hila's throat the entire fucking time as well, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody is raging on Ethan, calling him like a genocide apologist, making fun of him. That cartoon of Hila like shooting children is like circulating again on YouTube. I just read a huge docs of like Hila's like military history in some crazy subreddit where they're trying to like, oh, she was probably raiding in Palestinian villages and killing Palestinians and shit. And I think that H3H3 production subreddit is like running with that now. Like, yeah, it's wild. These people are subhuman. All of these like lefty fucks, like, yeah, holy shit. It's unreal. Yeah, it's unreal.
It's really been something, man, because I had to back away from politics for a little bit just for my own sake. Like, yeah, sometimes you just got to take steps in life to like protect your mental.
Yeah.
And I just like, it was just getting too much for me, especially in the Biden era. Like I was just seeing so many takes that I found infuriating that I just didn't have enough like emotional space there. So I was just like, I'm way too invested in this. I'm going to log off for like a little bit and just play games and hang out with my fiance and just kind of get more focused on life. And so I've been kind of coming back into the political scene in the last like couple of months, and just I'm doing like, I feel like I have a much better perspective now, and I just don't let things get to me like they used to. But the Ethan stuff, that did get to me. I just imagine telling someone who, a Jewish man who lived in Israel, who undoubtedly has family in Israel, who undoubtedly probably knows somebody who either indirectly or directly was affected by that slaughter. Imagine telling someone to their face that you shouldn't even talk about that, because when you talk about that, you're basically an Israeli propagandist who are justifying a genocide, when he said, I don't even know how many times. It was like 24 times. Straight up said, I do not condone a lot of the actions that IDF takes. And even after all that, it feels like so many people online take this position that like I've done a bunch of posts on Twitter about like how Hamas are like not your friend. If you're a leftist, they are not interested in your concept of liberation.
They don't give a fuck at all. Yeah.
And people would immediately jump in and reply with, you Zionist pig.
Yeah.
Why do you co-sign on what the IDF is? And it's like they make all these assumptions. And yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, you already have a take on this. It's just the absolutism is wild.
Yeah, it's pretty disappointing. Yeah. And then like they just like throw around words like genocide and apartheid and all this like, and colonialism and oppressor and blah blah blah, and like, yeah. And then nobody even has, especially as I've done even the little bit of reading I've done so far, like I realize now as I'm watching videos like how unbelievably one-sided like so many different takes are. To be fair, a lot of pro-Israel takes are really one-sided too. That al-Nakba one is a really good example, where you can tell that as like Israel bravely stood on a day of defiance against all of the Arab nations coming down to try to eliminate it, and it stood up for itself and it defended its territories. Or you can tell it as, maniacal, militaristically minded Jews who were stronger than all the surrounding Arab nations forcibly expelled an innocent 700,000 plus Arab population just so they could conquer the territory. Right? You can tell all of these stories in such a one-sided way that it just gets really stupid. Yeah.
The fog of war do be thick, and it gets very tricky when both Hamas and Israel are aggressively both engaging in like really aggressive propaganda campaigns.
A little bit. I would be careful One thing I'm trying not to do as much is I think we need to be careful not to draw a false equivalency between the two. The operations are quite different. Like, there have been multiple Palestinian terrorist, like full-on terrorist groups throughout history. Palestinians have overtly tried to overthrow and coup countries and assassinate leaders in other countries to like take over and shit so that they continue to fight with Israel. The IDF is not perfect and they do bad things, but you have to keep in mind, I think, that like every one of these wars and conflicts is like an existential threat for Israel and potentially every Jew living in Israel. It's not necessarily the same for the countries around them fighting. So they do both do bad things, but I think we have to be careful not to draw a false equivalency, at least between Hamas and the IDF. I don't think they operate the same.
I don't think I was drawing a false equivalency. I'm just saying that it's just something that you can observe, and it's kind of an expected phenomenon. Like, any country is going to engage in propaganda efforts at a time like this. And so I saw you calling into question the Gaza Health Ministry numbers, and you know, I have similar questions as well. The UN apparently thinks that they're quite credible. That's like the steel man there. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like the UN has come out like multiple times and said that they generally accept that these figures are true. On
a broad level, I feel like mainstream narratives right now are suspiciously, I say suspicious, that sounds so conspiratorial. I feel like there are reasons why a lot of media people want to be incredibly generous to the Palestinians and come down very harshly on Israel. So that's one thing I try to keep in mind. This is true even of some of the stuff the UN says. That being said, there are people dying in Palestine. If a report came out tomorrow that there was like thermal imaging and they identified every single body, that the Gazan Health Ministry numbers were 100% accurate for every civilian that died, that wouldn't be that surprising to me, right? They don't have to exaggerate the numbers that much. There are people dying in Gaza for sure. So I would never tell anybody that like, oh, those numbers are definitely fake. The thing that I'm generally the most critical of is when they release these numbers and they say every single person that died is a civilian. That's almost certainly bullshit, right? But I'm sure there must be people dying, probably in the thousands, if not more than that by now. I wouldn't just like out of hand like say like, oh, the Gazan Health Ministry, Hamas, those numbers are fake. Like, I'm sure there are people dying, you know? Yeah.
Dude, I feel like it's really hard to have a firm stance when it comes to whether or not you want to justify what Israel is doing, because and I found that this was like an interesting moment in the Piers Morgan Hasan interview, because Piers Morgan asked him, just straight up asked him, and I also thought it was interesting that Hasan in that interview, did you actually catch that he acknowledged that Israel has a right to exist and defend itself? That actually fucking
but I don't even, Hasan is an idiot. I don't even know if he knows what he's talking about half the time. Like, he just truly just fucking clueless. Like, so he might have said that. I don't know if he actually means that. I would be surprised if push comes to shove and you get Hasan in a conversation. He probably wouldn't acknowledge it. I don't think he would. I could be wrong. I'd be interested to hear him like have a more drawn out conversation about that. But because that's not what most of the pro-Palestinian groups, I don't believe, feel right now. It feels like they want Israel to be gone or there to be a one-state solution. But
well, I think sometimes Hasan hides his power level a little bit, but in that conversation with Piers Morgan, Piers straight up just said like, look, I'm not trying to tell you what is right and what is wrong. I just want to ask the question, if you think that Israel has a right to exist, and if you think that Israel has a right to defend itself, and I think Hasan jumped in and was like, of course everybody thinks this, which I was like, okay, that's an indirect.
Hasan always does that. You can ask a question. He's so good. You should take notes. You should watch Hasan and the way that he runs his chat sometimes. He's very good at picking out the worst comments and only responding to strawmans and never actually directly addressing criticism. He's really good at this. It would be, for instance, I ask you, do you think that it's ethical for you to shoot and kill somebody if they bust into your house? Hasan's answer would be something like this. He'd go, I mean, I wouldn't feel like I need to shoot and kill somebody. I'd probably just like run away, or I'd probably like call the cops or something. He will never actually answer the question. He has very good ways of like diverting.
He would deflect to like poverty stats from the last 2 decades and talk about how like these things don't happen in a vacuum or whatever.
Yeah, and then he'll tangent go somewhere else, and he doesn't get nailed down on those nearly. Even Pierce was missing him on some, but he's very, very good at doing that. Yes.
I don't think Pierce nailed him down on a single answer, but the one that I want to key in on, I'm getting sidetracked. Pierce asked a question that I had been asking myself, and I don't have an answer, which is, I do believe that Israel has a right to exist. I do believe that they have a right to defend themselves. And I do believe that they have a right to, and it's justified to set the militaristic goal of eliminating Hamas. That this is like any country in their shoes would be doing the same thing. The question is, what amount of force is justified in the pursuit of that goal? And I don't have a good answer for that because I'm not comfortable with fucking 3,500 Palestinian babies being killed.
The problem is like, how do you, like, here's a question I ask you. Do you think the U.S. killed too many civilians in the invasion of Iraq?
Yes.
Why? Do you know that? I don't know that. I think it's really hard.
The numbers that I've seen have been ranged anywhere between several 100,000 and 2 million dead or displaced Iraqis.
Okay, never mind. Hold on. Those are, none of that is true. I understand why you're saying it though, and I know the numbers you're talking about. I've heard this.
That's why I said range, by the way.
Sure. Well,
at the minimum, it's hundreds of thousands. I don't know where you heard otherwise. Where did you hear otherwise?
Hold on one second. Fuck. I would have to go and dig through this again. I know that Chomsky was part of this, and other people too, where they talk about like, I think the number they usually cite is like 500,000 of civilians that are like killed as a result of like military conflict and shit. I'm trying to find out. I think oh god, I don't want to be like super off on this. I feel like of the actual invasion itself, I thought the number of civilians killed wasn't it like, it was within like less than 20,000, I thought.
Are you talking about just the initial invasion?
Yeah, so I'm talking about like the invasion of the deposition of Saddam Hussein and everything, not like the 10 years of occupation or whatever.
Oh, okay. I have no idea what those numbers are.
Okay, sure. I'm sorry. The reason why I bring this up, because I'm thinking military operations. The reason why I bring this up is because people will say something like, "Oh, like that's too many civilian deaths," and they'll name like 4,000, right? But the standard can't be zero. Right? Like there's no way there's going to be zero deaths in any invasion. So then the question is it more deaths than it needs to be? And I'm not a military commander. I don't know that much about like military operations. I don't know the answer to that, right? It might be the fact that a sloppy invasion or a sloppy bombing of Gaza could leave 300,000 civilians dead. It could be that like the most precise targeting ever could just leave 2,000 civilians dead, right? So it might be that like if they've killed 3,000 or 4,000, then they're doing pretty good. Or it might be a dramatic overshoot and they're being too reckless. But I don't know what it looks like to conduct those operations perfectly, you know?
Yeah, it might be moral cowardice. My simple answer is it doesn't make me feel good to think about it. It's a bullshit answer, but that's literally what my answer is.
Yeah, sure. I agree with that, yeah.
And so like, and it kind of harkens back to like the discourse that popped up when the Oppenheimer movie came out, which I want to talk to you about for the record. God. But you recall the discourse that popped up, like renewed discourse about the dropping of the bombs. And so like when I look back on that, it's like you can't know for sure what a ground invasion of Japan would have looked like in terms of body count, but there's no reason to disbelieve entirely the notion that it could have resulted in anywhere between like, I don't know if the estimates were like 2 to 5 million dead, not just US
I think it was 1 million plus on
civilians.
just the US side, and then for Japanese civilian casualties and everything, it was like very, very high as well, yeah.
Right, and so when you look at that calculus, and like you could even make a moral argument that it was the right thing to do to drop the bomb. So it all gets very murky, but yeah, it is hard to have like a really firm stance in terms of laying out what I would feel comfortable with, because like I said, I do believe that they have a legitimate right to want to end Hamas.
Sure.
And it seems insane to me to push back against that. Like,
I guess like the scary thing you have to talk about though is, let's say that you have a right to end Hamas. Do you have a right to end, like the Palestinian Liberation Organization too, the PLO or the PA or whatever, any of these Palestinian groups that exist in the West Bank? Because those people fund, like, I think the PLO is the one that started and continues to this day to run the fund where if you kill any Israeli citizens in any way, like if you suicide bomb or if you're part of military activities against Israeli citizens, they'll pay out, they've got a fund where they pay money to your family for the rest of their lives, right? And that's from the West Bank. So if you make this argument that Israel's a right to get rid of Hamas, do they have a right to go to the West Bank and get rid of those, radical Palestinian groups as well?
I think from a practical perspective, the argument is much stronger against Hamas because their goal is the establishment of an Islamic state that stretches the entire region, whereas PLO would be at least historically have been closer to accepting some kind of a two-state solution. So I'm not saying like it's likely that they would accept it. I'm not saying that they haven't done any violence, but if your goal in the long term is a two-state solution, you're going to have a much easier time getting that from the PLO or from the PA than you are from Hamas. And so just like kind of logically, to me, it makes sense. Like Hamas, their goal is never going to change. Like
Yeah.
they're very explicit about their goals, and that's just you can't even negotiate with that.
Sure. However, while everything that you just said is true, another problem too, because people just make this about Israel and Palestine, which is not really. The issue is the people that really need to come to the table for any kind of actual peace treaty to be made are all of the other Arab nations in the area. If Palestine and Israel agree to shit, it doesn't matter if Iran doesn't agree, right? If Iran is still funding Hezbollah or other radical Palestinian movements, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Saudi Arabia doesn't have an agreement. It doesn't matter if Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq don't come to agreements, right? These are all people that have participated in military hostilities against Israel for one reason or another. If we don't get all of them to agree to these types of things as well, it doesn't matter. Any deal that Palestine and Israel work out with each other is essentially meaningless. And I think people don't talk enough because for some reason Israel is held to this like ungodly standard of being able to like unilaterally work out peace in the entire region, or the US is blamed for not negotiating it. But we truly can't do that without the other Arab states coming to the table and being willing to even work with Israel, which is hard. Yeah.
I know that there have been renewed talks with Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. I have no idea where, like, I'm not up to date on the
My understanding is, I think where we're at right now,
Lebanon's at.
I think that Saudi Arabia was an official talks with Israel, but I think this angered the Palestinian people because I believe the Palestinians don't want other countries to negotiate with Israel until borders are decided. But the reason why I don't think Israel wants to decide borders is because countries, people like Palestine, want to decide borders without actually acknowledging that Israel is a country. So there's like this weird, it's like Taiwan, where like there's this weird like situation in the Middle East where none of these other Arab countries even want to do business directly with Israel or acknowledge them as a country, because that would basically be granting them statehood and then acknowledging borders and everything else. So yeah. Although my info on that isn't 100% current. I don't know if anybody has like recently signed something related to that, but yeah, that's like an issue. Is as soon as you recognize Israel's borders, now it's a big deal, because fighting past armistice lines is like, okay, well, it's ongoing military conflict, whatever. But if Israel's like a de jure nation and they have actual borders that are recognized by the world, well, now invasions and attacks are really big deals.
Yeah. If anything, I find the notion, there's like this popular notion in some circles right now that the conflict is actually quite simple. And I find the very notion of something like that just utterly laughable. Anyways,
sure.
I've had a good time talking with you. I got to go in like 15 minutes, but I did want to get your...
Oh, no.
The fuck is with your Oppenheimer take? Like, how did you...
Oh, God.
What's your problem with that movie?
Here is like my broad criticism, okay? I felt like the movie it covered too many plot points, and I felt like it was edited so aggressively that like every scene is a bit of exposition, a few cuts, and music driving every single scene forward. Like the emotion, I feel like in some of these movies, Nolan movies, is very low. The dialogue is very robotic, and he's trying to cover too much ground, and there's like no emotional gravity to like almost anything. That was my feeling on it. Like that one girl dying and his wife finding him, and like that scene was like 2 seconds. Him like still like, that was just like the feeling. Maybe if I go back and watch it, maybe I'll feel differently. But I feel like it's so breakneck speed edited for everything and tries to cover so much ground. I feel like they should have if they would have dumped the whole plot line with him losing his security clearance or just made it about the bomb or something, I feel like the movie would have benefited from it. But I feel like it tried to do way too much. That was my feeling.
Nolan's kind of the opposite of Paul Thomas Anderson. So Paul Thomas Anderson, he did like Magnolia, Boogie Nights, Licorice Pizza. He gives his scenes all this space. So there'll be like long silences, and so the actors are carrying scenes just with like the looks on their face for like that's his whole style. He's like the complete opposite of Nolan. All of his movies are like 99% exposition, really fast, sharp editing, powerful soundtrack. Those are like the three. So there's always like some music playing in every single scene in a Nolan film.
Oh, thank you, sir.
And
yeah, sorry, keep going.
You got Lycan's your personal chef now. That's a fucking good little situation there.
Yeah, I agree. He's a really good cook. So
yeah, but I did not like, my experience with that film was I was utterly captivated from the very first opening scene until the last. I was not bored at all. If anything, there was one part where like, honestly, the explosion itself, I felt was like kind of underwhelming, which I thought was a little odd. So if I'm going to give the movie like one weakness, I would say that when the Trinity test actually happened, and the bomb went off, I was kind of had this feeling of like, that's it, like that.
Well, I think the issue, I don't think it was so much like the scene and everything itself. I think the issue is like, so here's like a question. What was the climax of that movie?
The climax would have been at the end when he says the line, I think we destroyed the world anyways. Like, he was afraid that he was going to destroy the world with a bomb, and then I think that he did. And I think it was just basically the whole movie was about him wrestling with the...
Yeah, but is that the climax of the movie? Is him stating that line?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I feel like the movie just didn't have like a good direction. It didn't feel like built around a particular thing. Like, I was surprised that like the bomb went off. Also, I feel like there's so much interesting stuff to dive into. I don't need anything about Oppenheimer's personal life. No offense to the guy, but he's a physicist. Why the fuck would I care about his wife's or his affairs or any bullshit like that? I feel like focusing on the Manhattan Project.
Hold on, because you had to tell that story though because of it tied into the Red Scare of that.
You don't
era.
need his personal story for that. Nah, I don't believe that.
But that was the bridge to his quote unquote communist ties. Like,
I mean, you could have done it in like a whatever. Listen, he does exposition, do an exposition scene. I would have wanted more of like the actual Manhattan Project. I think there was a lot of cool stuff that could have been mined there for content. There was a lot of cool stories that probably been told, a lot of cool decisions. But like having the whole thing of his personal life, of which I honestly I just didn't give a fuck about it. He had like he had like a baby in one scene. He gave it away in the next, and then like 5 minutes later, his kid was like 6 years old. Like, I have no emotional connection to any of this. The girl dying that we saw for all of like 2 minutes on screen, I didn't give a fuck that she died. I had no emotional connection to her. The Los Alamos Project was like, I don't know what, got like 15 minutes of screen. Like, I don't care about that.
No,
the bomb exploding,
it was like
I don't
an
care.
hour.
Maybe, I don't know, but like every conversation is just like a meme. It feels like, I feel like Nolan thinks he's writing for Marvel movies, where every single back and forth, he's trying to get like a new fucking Twitter quote when he's like having these dialogue between characters, and it's like so edgy and shit. It's like, can I just get like some human interaction? I don't know. I felt like everything was like so, and then every cut to I don't remember Robert Downey Jr.'s character's name.
Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, the cringe name dropping of like with Einstein, and I think they do it with Kennedy. It's just like, oh, I don't know. I hated that movie. I hated everything.
Here, I'm gonna revise what I said.
Yeah,
I'm gonna say the climax of the movie was Robert Downey Jr. Kind of getting his comeuppance and losing out on that cabinet post. That I think was probably like the true climax. Or you could say the scene where his wife Kitty was giving the testimony in that little private trial or whatever. Like, those are two. I kind of.
Oh yeah, where she randomly becomes like a strong character for like 1-2 minutes, and like yeah.
She was a strong character the whole time. She had a strong personality. She was just a bit of a wino.
Yeah.
Anyways, I fucking love. If you thought that movie was boring, do not see Killers of the Flower Moon. Because you will fucking.
I don't think
yourself.
Oppenheimer was boring. I think it was bad. I don't think that movie had time to be boring. The fucking every 2 seconds, it felt like a never-ending trailer. Killer of the Flower Moon.
Killers of the Flower. It's the new Scorsese film. It's 3.5 hours long, and it's a piece of American history that's fucking fascinating. I knew nothing about it. There was this. Do you know anything about the Osage tribe?
Nope.
Bro, this tribe, this Native American tribe negotiated a lease from the U.S. government, and part of the agreement was that anything they found on that land they could keep, and they struck massive oil.
Okay.
And so for this brief period of history, this Osage Native American tribe were per capita the most wealthy people in the entire world.
Okay.
But the United States government implemented a system where if you deemed a Native American incompetent, you could appoint a conservator or a guardian to monitor and control how they spent that money.
Sure.
And I don't want to give too much away, but there's murder, there's intrigue, and it might be my favorite movie this year, but it's 3.5 hours long, and yeah. Anyways, check it out. It's good. It's interesting. Really interesting part of American history. I knew nothing about it before I saw the movie, but yeah, it was good talking to you, man. I was glad to catch up with you.
All right, well, I love you, buddy. Be careful, okay?
Yeah, take it easy.
Stay safe. Bye.